encourage you to explore, which is a completely new paradigm. Yes, we still try to strategically get that message in front of you, but we're looking for it out of a different motivation, understanding that we're building relationships, not just driving sales. Driving sales is hopefully the end product, but it's ultimately the relationship that we would like to cultivate. And right now, we really do think about all of the media in our toolbox as direct media. There isn't every single thing that we have at our disposal to interact is really can be utilized in a very direct way. So we now take a very, very integrated approach to try to be where you want us to be, how you want us to be there, and put in controls about whether you want to engage with us in that way. So the question came up about, and I know there's probably a lot of curiosity in this room, is what are you guys using our data for? And we are our own brand of data scientists. We have statisticians in the industry. We work with algorithms and modeling, and we are studying you. We're studying both buyers and non-buyers, and what we're looking for is those values, those interests, those needs and unmet needs. So we look at your behaviors, what you're buying, what you're avoiding, what how can we make correlations between those insights and learn about the actions and your preferences, and how can we shape companies around you to serve your needs and be there the way that you want us to be there. So I wanted to tell a little story about the other day. I was taking this survey about what charities that I support. And this is the thank you screen that came up as a result of me participating in that charity survey. And I'm sure this is not an accident, that we are taking contextual data and we are using it in ways to engage you at your interest level. So I asked around the office, did you see this? Did you think it was a little creepy? And we have, a variety of points of view in our office, not just marketing. And the entire team felt that this was actually the best way to serve our audiences in bringing to them opportunities that are topically relevant right now to what they're interested in. And this is the power that we have in new technology. Let me move on. This story about Target has come up several times. I know that it's something that you guys pay attention to. It's something also that we as marketers note, archive, look at over and over again. What can we learn from this? The things we learned as an industry about this accident is that we can't take data, just a few perspectives about data and use them. We have to really think about it. Now, the overlay that they did not put on this action was age and context. They merely looked at behavioral data. And so, we need to take a better view of our customers in order to bring them the types of things that are relevant, that are respectful of their situation. And in fact, Target now utilizes a much different tactical approach in mixing up those coupons. So it's not really evident that that you're pregnant and you need these products. It's looking at you more as a total human being and bringing to you opportunities that might interest you in a more holistic standpoint. So we learn from our errors. We're human beings. I'm sure that Target felt that they were really, serving their customer, and I hope that as journalists, you recognize that this isn't an attack on consumer. This is a feeling of wanting to serve.
Yeah, this came up earlier today, that there's this value for the data, that you're not, when you're getting something for free, you're really not getting something for free. There's some sort of value transaction there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a value transaction that's driving the business. Being pro-data is actually very pro-business, and we as consumers really need to embrace business. It drives the health of our economy. And specifically, the data-driven marketing economy is a massive contribution to our economy. And I wanted to tell the story in numbers about what contribution it's really making. Because when you say 156 billion, you cannot really put your head around that until you realize you could buy 312 million iPads with that. Or over 1 million houses. It's a huge number. But more important, I think, is the amount of people that it employs. And they're good jobs that drive a lot of tax base, and they make a great contribution to our society and to our public. So, we tell the story a lot about, how all this is good for business, but the truth is using data is very, very good for the consumer. We want to improve our relevance to you. We want to reduce the amount of time we're wasting of yours. We want to, bring you things that are more customized to your needs, more personal. We want to use what we know about you to shape content that's going to be valuable to you. And recognizing also that what we need to do for business is help them be more efficient, to keep their costs low, so that their products and services can be competitive in the market. We also use data about you to help them optimize their operations so that they're more customer-centric, so that they're able to recognize your individual needs when you're calling to the call center and be able to anticipate those things that are going to surprise and delight you and help get you through, whatever issue you have efficiently, and build the relationship. We also use that data to improve products. What are you buying? What aren't you buying? What features are you looking for? Benefits? What do you value about those experiences? How can we shape things that solve problems for you? And I do need to let you know that one of the big backbones of the American economy is only strong because of the ability to use data. It really lowers the threshold of their ability to enter a market and access a market very efficiently. Otherwise, small business would be absolutely unable to compete, and that's not an insignificant value to our society. One thing I'm excited about in terms of data is the ability to reduce the amount of waste from a ecological standpoint, and especially big data, and be able to really understand a larger context for what content that you want, so that we can engage you with stuff that you really are looking for. I would really like to get rid of that 44% of discarded, unread mail that you may be receiving. All I can say is help me do that by helping, engaging with the companies that want to have a relationship with you, that want to solve problems for you, help them better understand you and what you want and need.
Well, and it's also organizations' responsibility to maybe send one message to the folks who do open their emails, and maybe approach the relationship to those who don't open the emails or use that mail. So there are tools that organizations can use to make the messages more relevant, so you're more likely to not want to discard it.
Yeah, I advise clients all the time about cleansing their database, engaging on a level that people want to engage on, and unengagement is engagement of a certain type. We need to respect it and acknowledge it, and if what we're sending isn't engaging, then we need to find new ways to learn, or not clutter up people's inboxes or mailboxes with those messages. I wanted to speak to the paradox that we're all living with, both journalists and PR and marketing in terms of the relevance versus privacy. And here you see that tension expressed in just a simple Google search on the front page. Two conflicting things right in the same search. So they want more flexibility and they want more privacy. And often there's a conflict between those two things. So to deliver flexibility, we need to know what it is that you need, and privacy online. There's often the only data that we can perceive is what actions are being taken. So again, what we need is a real partnership with consumers in terms of finding ways to solve for both of those. It's a challenge, I think, in both journalism and in marketing. I spoke to this morning. I'm not going to say too much more about it. In fact, it's just an extension of the previous conversation around, we want businesses need that intelligence, but they also need to respect privacy. And your voice is going to be very important as we move through the next phase of exploring artificial intelligence and what it means from a business standpoint. But we do know that it's really in our best interest to operate ethically. We know through research that we've done as an industry that we can't afford not to operate ethically. Every time we do, we lose money. We're about business, building businesses. So, we are our own watchdogs in the advertising industry. We are self-regulating, and we're listening very closely to what consumers want. I wanted to introduce you to the Direct Marketing Association's guidelines for ethical business practice, where you'll find 51 pages and many of them completely devoted to how we work with data. This is accessible on the DMA website, and I invite you to take a look at it. But I wanted to ask a question of the room, like our first interactive moment of this hour is, I want you to read this situation, and I would really like to hear from you whether the three words at the top are true of this situation. So several health insurers wrote directly to patients who had been prescribed a particular medication in order to suggest they switch to an equivalent and cheaper drug. Helpful, ethical, legal? Anybody? I'm not going on until somebody answers.
Okay.
It's cheaper.
I was going to say,
It saves me money.
Actually happened to me. Creepy and helpful.
Yep. Happened to me too. So I looked to see whether it was legal. And in fact, it is not legal. Anything to do with healthcare, is absolutely regulated to the nth degree. But it becomes, it became a gray line for advertisers working in the insurance industry about wanting to be helpful, wanting to create solutions that drive down the cost of products, and being absolutely unable to do that legally. So when these situations pop up, it's important to understand the context, the total context of what's really happening here. And the way that we report on these situations is very important. Because we really don't want to send a message out that, health insurers are, breaking the law and breaking HIPAA laws without really putting it in the larger context of it was a gray area, and it was out of wanting to be helpful and wanting to do the right thing. But in this case, it was not legal, and they needed to explore other ways to get their message out. So I did speak to this a little bit this morning in terms of big data. It's often the least efficient way that businesses have to actually run what drives their business and what drives their relationships. So I think that you will see a lot of big business or big data applications around business optimization, around analysis. And I honestly don't think that we're going to see a lot of big data around individuals and their behaviors around specific things to the nth degree of invasion of privacy. I just don't see that happening. And just know that when a bank is looking at how they're going to be driving their business, they're looking for products that you need, and they already have the data around what you have and what you might need. They don't need to overlay anything else on that to serve you. And I also wanted to throw out here, you know, you and I we all share this. How do we sort through these statistics that are being thrown at us? You know, how can we make a sense of a study done by Google? You know, is it a valid statistic? You know, how can we evaluate how we engineer our marketing based on a statistic that's supplied by somebody with such an obvious, bias and agenda?
You mentioned something earlier today, Gina, is how can we use data to help us understand the diversity in our communities too? So many times we are given data or acquire data that is biased or maybe doesn't reflect the entire community, but how can we find data and use data to help overcome those gaps, those biases, and especially when it comes to diversity issues too? Right.
Absolutely, because certainly in this study, they did not, many groups would not be represented. Mm-hmm. And what I want to understand better is what's underneath the hood on this data. How did they confirm that 4 out of 5 consumers say that they really want ads to be geo-targeted to them? Is that out of behavior, or is that out of a battery of questions that actually get to that? And I think that as advertisers and as journalists, we need to get under the hood of the data and not just take statistics at face value. But in the meantime, I want to talk to that, you know, that one consumer, you know, a lot. I really want to talk to that one consumer a lot. Talked about a little bit about this morning about free business models, and what I want to say here, in addition to what I didn't say this morning, is that we have free models now, and we pretty much have mass adoption. We're at that point. When it technology has a certain life cycle, and what we may begin to see is that there will be pay-to-play products that meet the same needs as these free products. The implication being there that people who can afford to stay private will be able to stay private. They'll pay for it, which leaves kind of a disparity in the available data other platforms will have. I just want to give out a watch out for that in the future, that we may be seeing even more difficulty really understanding discrete groups in future based on these new product models. And that's about it. I just want to throw those things out there as thought starters.
So those are really great and key ideas about how the marketing industry is using data. The other day, for example, I was trying to convert a PDF to a Word document. And I find this happening with different tools like this all the time. And I found all these great tools, and you could do it for free, but it would only turn it into a PowerPoint presentation. I didn't want my PDF to be a PowerPoint presentation. I wanted it to be a Word doc. So of course, I needed to pay for that up value. And I think that the same goes with, privacy. We have, certain versions of SlideShare and all these social networks that we can use for free, but at the expense of what? And are there going to be upsell opportunities to be able to protect your privacy? So I think that that's an interesting business model that we might see developing. Okay, so now we've talked about marketing. Let's move over to Stephanie, and let's hear about how PR professionals are building campaigns around data and using data in those campaigns.
And I did want to make a couple comments on what you just said. In terms of the pay-to-play game, I think we're seeing this in business. Just with Facebook, if you've all noticed, they've kind of minimized our visibility in terms of their algorithms. They've tweaked things a bit. So I think that we are forced, or businesses are forced now to actually pay in order to be seen in those news feeds. So that's something that goes along with what you're saying. And I also wanted to talk about the Google search in terms of kind of creating these filter bubbles. So if we put in there our zip code and we only get information that's relevant to our zip code and our interests, how is that impacting us as people? I mean, are we becoming one-minded, not realizing what else is out there for us to see in the world because we're only being served up what Google thinks we want? So that's something else that I kind of wonder.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, who's making those decisions about what I get to see?
Right.
Yeah.
So to my point, I put some awesome slides together for you, black and white. Hopefully you can read them. Hopefully I can read them. I wanted to talk a little bit about this from a research perspective and how public relations professionals or practitioners use or tap into this big data to inform strategy and our decisions with strategic communication, and also to validate our existence at the management table. So we have to use data in order to show our success on a campaign, or if we've created awareness, or if we've energized a certain stakeholder group. So we have to look at these metrics. So it's a new skill set for a lot of our students. But let's talk a little bit about this with regard to social media data. Now that's only one piece, and we always have to remember that social media data may not be reflective of the entire population, and that there may be other pieces of context that we're not pulling into this. So we always have to make sure that we're looking at this in line with other data to make the most comprehensive decisions. But it is awesome because now we have an opportunity to tap into our audiences and find out what their perceptions and their attitudes are about our brands. Just through some simple keyword searches on social media, we can kind of find out what the sentiment or the tone is. Again, it's kind of tricky, but we can get some insight that way. So we have a world of opportunity at our fingertips with regard to how our brands are perceived. We also use data and a lot of this big data to help us find our brand ambassadors or our opinion leaders or our influencers that help us carry our messages. So I think that's a really important component here. And then another piece, too, that I think is important to talk about is crisis communications and how we can use some of the data that we find in just the social media realm, and we can actually head off a crisis. So I was reading an article, an example of this was I always use United Breaks guitars in my classes, but I'm not going to do that to my students. I see you out there. I'll spare you that case study. But I was reading a case study recently about Kraft foods. So they were actually able to use some keyword searches and kind of mine some social media analysis, and they found cut and blood showing up with their brand name. So they were able to dig a little deeper as soon as they saw that come through, and evidently people were getting cut on their salad dressing bottle packages. So they were able to head that crisis off a little quicker because they were kind of monitoring the situation. So I think they were interviewing their data.
Right, Daniel?
Nice. Yeah. That was a great, I did write that down. That was a tweetable tweet. And then I already just said that data really validates success. So I think this is an opportunity for us as educators and for you as students to learn a new skill set and actually start critically thinking about the data and interviewing the data and knowing what nuggets matter, because we have all of this stuff to filter through and all of this noise, and how are we going to make sense of it? So I think that's another piece of this. Oh, this was a real-time opportunity. I retweeted what Google Glass, or what our keynote speaker, Robert, sent out, and I got a real-time tweet back, considered spammy, but it was a real-time opportunity for this brand to get out in front of me. So another touch point. And they're monitoring their data and their social media. So I thought that was interesting. So let's talk a little bit about some challenges with data. I think it is hard for us to identify what it is that matters and how to always tie things back to the business objectives. But I think it starts with solid objectives and measurable objectives, so we know what it is that we are trying to achieve, and then that way we can kind of filter through the data and know exactly what metrics we're looking for. So that's one thing, is actually kind of weeding through all the noise.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's good.
So important, because there are so many times both news organizations and outside of news organizations will say, my goal for my social media strategy is that I want to get more Twitter followers, or I want to get more Facebook fans. And really, those are your tactics or objectives. Really, you measure matters, but having coherent goals, what you're really saying by that is you want to grow and engage an audience.
Increase awareness about my product, or yes, create brand ambassadors. So that's the ultimate goal. And then how do those other objectives and those metrics fit within that umbrella? And knowing exactly how to pick those out of all this data. I think that's where the challenge comes into play. Another thing is data is subject to interpretation. I think we do rely on statistics, especially if it comes from a reliable source. And you can skip to the next slide, because this was just a simple example. Do you guys all remember the Google flu trends a while back? This was supposed to be the poster child of big data. And I think recently they found that it wasn't as accurate as they once predicted. So this was where they said that people would type in a search term that would predict how the flu is spreading across the nation. And it was supposed to be as accurate as the CDC. Well, they found out that this model has actually overestimated, and it wasn't as accurate as they originally thought. So again, I think we're still trying to make sense of how all of this data works, and we're losing context. Because just because I typed in the words cough and fever didn't necessarily mean that I had the flu. So again, things to think about with regard to context and how big data really, what it really means. Okay, so you showed what the mission was, and I find it fascinating because we always talk about integrated communications, and she said her mission was to build relationships. That's what mine is. Public relations is a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships. So we are an advocacy profession. We are there to help the business, advocate for our clients, but also in the best interest of the public. So that's the key, and that's where the data privacy comes into play, because we are looking at both of those stakeholder groups. Go ahead. And here's our professional values. So we do have a code of ethics that we subscribe to. So those ethical practitioners out there are concerned with advocacy, as I said, with the interest of the publics. Being honest, we're adhering to the highest standards of accuracy and truth. Loyal, faithful to those we represent, while honoring our obligation to serve the public. And fairness. We respect all opinions and the support for free expression. So again, I always want to refer my students back to this code of ethics, because it provides us with some great guidelines. And I think we hear this buzzword all the time, transparency, transparency. I think that's key. And it was interesting to hear Joe speak, because it's a completely different perspective with regard to what they share. Whereas in the business world, we want to share our methods. We want to share and be transparent with how we arrived at data and what our sources were. So I think that's key. And if we don't, we'll be held accountable and we'll be called out for it, especially with social media. I mean, just look at what's going on with the NFL. Another thing that I wanted to mention too was the fact that we are having these conversations not just today, but in the industry. So there was just recently a gathering of like 14 associations and organizations that got together to talk about the ethical standards with regard to measurement and research. And they're putting together these guidelines on how or what engagement means or what sentiment means, so that everybody is approaching this stuff from the same perspective. So I think it's important, and I think this is something for us to do together, to collaborate on what these standards are and how we're capturing this data. And in terms of transparency, I put this up here quickly. Don't look at all the tabs that I have open. I always get made fun of because it's bad. That's what my mind is like. But I wanted to show you this strictly because I think with regard to privacy and big data and making sure that our business clients are held accountable and transparent, we have to enforce the fact that people need to opt out of us watching them. And I found this interesting when I was on WordPress the other day in my class, my PR Online Tactics class, my students' blog, and I was on my account page, and I thought this was amazingly easy, because how hard is it to opt out of something on social media? You don't even know where the guidelines are, what the privacy policy is, or what exactly they're capturing. You have to dig very deep. So I thought this was kind of cool that they actually told me that I could opt out of these two organizations that were monitoring what I was doing on the site. And I already mentioned this in terms of us teaching our students how to critically analyze data and to interview that data and to interpret it and present it in a fair way. Oh, we can talk about that later as we continue the dialogue. Go ahead.
No, what you had is a good segue to
Okay, good.
I'm a little bit worried about how I squeeze into this.
Okay.
So. Okay. Okay, I was getting a little worried because I'm an investigative reporter and I don't do marketing, and I was a little nervous. So, but Stephanie provided a good segue for me.
And I think, Jennifer, your perspective is going to be very instructive, because a lot of the times as an investigative reporter, as a reporter in general, you receive a lot of data from corporations, marketing agencies, and so being able to know what to do with this information, yeah, that's a good face right there.
I really rely on you every single day. I honestly do.
So yeah.
Nobody in this room probably remembers this is one of my favorite Saturday Night Live characters, Debbie Downer, which I kind of felt my role was a little bit here today. So there's a lot of talk about big data, and I have a whole thing using grains of rice that talks about big data, which I won't do, but I will show you from the CIR Museum of Outdated Technology, our big floppy disk named Marion. It's an 8-inch floppy disk. That's our big data. Okay. So this is just a sampling of messages I got through email, on Twitter, on all kinds of things about data I should look at, and data for journalists and blah, blah, blah. So it does come to me a lot, and I do have to filter down, as Stephanie was talking about. For all of you who are thinking about going into journalism, one of the last things Stephanie said is so crucial: critical thinking. I could take someone who maybe doesn't have, super high-end programming skills or analyzing skills, but if they can think critically about data and question things and know the questions to ask, I would take that above all else. Because I think too often we do a lot of things where we put data up and it's super cool, but nobody is questioning that data or making sure it's right, or making sure, as I think someone said on an earlier panel, interpreting it so that it's actually sending the right message or telling the story accurately. So find out who funded the research, for example, if it is research data that you're getting. I always ask for a questionnaire and methodology, only because if I can't get it, that oftentimes is a red flag. Web surveys, man on the street, talking to people at the mall, is not a scientific method for gathering data. They're super fun. Web polls are super fun, but they're not scientific data. Know the sample size. If they talk to 3 people, that's not really a scientific study. Account for margins of errors, non-response. Look at the details of reports, and even super wonky, if you can run statistical tests on the data, even better. So I just have a couple of examples of things I ran into. We got this actually when I worked at the Dallas Morning News. There's a story about, and someone was starting to report on this, all that the highest gun dealers who sold guns used most often in crimes were all based actually in the DFW area. And so I thought, well, I'll look at the gun gun dealer license data and see if that's true. And indeed they were, but when they did this study, they did not filter for warehouses. And so I think there were 2 like Walmart warehouses and 1 other big company warehouse. It wasn't like they were little storefront gun dealers that were selling guns out. This was actually warehouses that if you were doing this kind of a study, you would probably filter out of the data. You know, one thing I watch for is who sponsored studies. Not that people who make things don't do fine studies about products they're associated with, but it always makes me ask more questions. So this chocolate milk, the new sports drink study, yes, indeed, partially funded by the Dairy Council. This is fun. But this is one example of data I was looking at. We were reporting, I showed an example earlier about how physicians were prescribing data to their patients. And one thing that popped out of that data was a physician in Oklahoma who was prescribing huge amounts of Alzheimer's drugs to kids. And we thought that was unusual. Of course, went and interviewed him, and he was talking about how there's been a ton of research on how these drugs can be really helpful to kids with autism. And so we went and tried to find the studies. This study was one of them, which was actually never completed. It was sponsored by Forest Laboratories, which makes Namenda, which was the Alzheimer's drug that he was using. And then another study, the only published study on this was a sample of 15 people. So it wasn't something that should have been widely used with thousands and thousands of kids.
Well, it said at the bottom that the doctor had received compensation too.
Yeah, he was paid.
Yeah.
So evaluating the data. Know what to look for in data, and I could talk about this forever, as Daniel knows, but data is inconsistent. Things are spelled differently in data. Things are categorized differently in data. And if you know how to spot those things, you're going to run into fewer problems. This is one example I use frequently, but because it's really out of whack. This is data that we received from the Department of Education, the department charged with educating the nation's children. And we were doing a project looking at access to advanced programs like AP, Advanced Math, Advanced Science in relationship to demographics. And all we did was sort the column on number of AP courses offered at each school. According to the College Board, there are 37 possible AP courses that can be offered. But that top school offered 22,233. That's greater than 37. So we knew there was a bit of a problem there. So we had to go back to schools and go back to districts to get the correct data because the education department said it was not their responsibility. The data was reported by schools and districts, and it is what it is. And that is the way data is often treated in some government agencies.
What had happened in that instance? Was they had just mixed up the wrong columns?
Nobody knows. Yeah. I mean, they could have had the 2 and the 3 stuck on their computer when they entered it. I mean, there are things they could have done to limit those errors. Like if someone typed in a number bigger than 37, they could have gotten an error back that said, oh, you can't enter that number. So there are things you can do to control for that. ProPublica early on did a lot of work on the stimulus, and they put out a report in which they called companies that did not report their stimulus reports two-time losers for failing to report their stimulus data. Well, the way they found the two-time losers is they matched the code of the company to the code in their reports. Well, the code of the company had dashes in it, and the code in the reports did not have the dashes in it. So the numbers were right, but when they did their little computer join, they didn't match up. And so they were wrongfully, blatantly, and they did call their press release two-time losers. So they had to retract that. a senator from St. Louis, this is several years ago, but I like this example because it talks about checking data, came out and accused thousands of St. Louis voters of fraudulently voting. They said there were thousands of votes cast from vacant lots in St. Louis. And so what we did is we went out and we started looking at the vacant lots. This is one of them. There were 1,000 votes cast from vacant lots in an election, but all but 2 of them actually had houses on them. So there was actually a completely different story because the property data had all these places that were assessed at vacant lot value when they were really houses. So the city was losing tons of tax money, but they really weren't vacant lots. So we went at, just the sheer effort of going out and looking at one helped us figure out that the story that might have been one thing was completely different. This is Texas truck accident data. I started playing around with areas where there were multiple accidents, and what I found is there were accidents that happened at the exact same location, at the exact same time, with the exact same people, but they had different accident codes, so they couldn't possibly be the same accident. Right? What's up? I went back to the state and asked them about it, and they said, let's get back to you. What had happened is their computer system was such where when somebody went in to add more information to an accident, they found out like what the driver's condition was or something like that in the record, instead of updating the accident record, it created a new one. So there were cases where an accident was duplicated like 10 times. So the number of accidents in the state was appeared way higher than it actually was. So some other integrity checks to put into your data sets. How many records? This seems like a simple thing, but ask the people who have the records how many there should be, and when you open it, see if you have the same number of records. That doesn't always happen. Things get lost, data gets converted. Check counts and totals to see if they're about what they should be. I worked with someone in Dallas. Texas has 254 counties, and they were doing a statewide story, and it turned out that 2 counties, I don't even remember what was happening, some kind of court thing, didn't happen in those 2 counties. So they were about to do a story how something didn't happen in those 2 counties. But they were very rural counties where they didn't have computer systems and they weren't reporting the data to the state. So it wasn't that it didn't happen, it's just the data wasn't in the state's database. Are you scared? No, I'm just kidding. Are all possibilities included? Are 50 states in it? Are all counties in it? Check for missing data, blank data. It doesn't mean that you can't use data when you run into these things, but you need to account for it and you need to explain it. Just gonna skip. So, a possible headline here, Washington, D.C. has the highest median income. Editors like lists. Editors like lists of the top 10 cities' median income, top 10 this, top 10 that. That's the problem when it comes to data that is from a sample, which this is census ACS data. And the red line means that any of the cities on that red line could be in whatever order. So it could be that the top city is either the DC metro area or the San Jose, California metro area, depending on where they fell in that range of possibilities on their value. So just be aware of that stuff. Houston had a huge drop in truck accidents. Look at that. Things that are huge changes often are a red flag that something else is going on, and what happened is Houston was not reporting its data to the state, and so it was not a lot safer there. It just was a lack of data. This is test score data from 2 different school districts from 2 different reports, one from the state, one from the district themselves. The numbers are different. That would be something where I'd want to go out and verify it with maybe another source or go back to them and find out what the deal is. That's why raw data makes us happy. I did not add this after the whole cat discussion. It was already in here. We can check for errors. I don't know if any of you will remember this, but many years ago, the vice president shot one of his hunting buddies in a hunting trip, and we got the state hunting accident data, and the state put out a press release of trends in hunting accident data, and I did my analysis, and then I looked at their report on their website, and it was different from what I was getting. I went back to the state, and they said, let us get back to you. And it turned out that they did something wrong in their analysis, and we were actually correct and they were wrong. So that's why if I can look at raw data or at least get a general sense of the methodology, it's very helpful. We can do different analyses. We can map it. We can look at statistical patterns. We can add other data to it. And many newsrooms have the capacity to do this. There's a lot of tools out there where you can, it makes analyzing data more accessible. So Daniel, when he was pointing out the skills he'd like people to learn, statistics was one of them. It's a very rare skill to get in a newsroom to have folks who can understand statistics. So that will put you way ahead of other people if you can do that. That's all I have. Thanks.
Of course.
And what's cool about Kent State's School of Journalism is that we are trying to stay current and provide students with these skills that you guys desire in the work. And Sue Zakewave, everybody, Sue, is actually teaching our big data class. So they're learning. I actually sat in on it last week, and they're learning how to use Excel and how to manipulate the data and clean it and find those nuggets and actually to ask questions of the data and find out what the problems are and how you can answer it with the data. So good job. Oh, and I'm also teaching, I hope, next semester a data analytics class. So kind of looking more at the web analytics with regard to Google Analytics and social media analytics, because I think that's a lot to filter through too.
Lunch I saw Pinterest just updated its analytics too. So, but yeah, so students, anyone that ever finds himself in a statistics class, I hope this conversation is validation that there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. You could get to work with somebody like Gina or Jennifer down the road. So.
Well, that sure is enticing, huh?
Yeah, I'd really completely second any coaching that you might get in terms of knowing the technology that's being used as well and getting some hands-on experience. One of the big things that's a big trend in marketing is predictive analytics, and I think that journalists would be well advised to know what that is and how companies are using it, how governments are using it. What are the applications, what are the capabilities, and what are the big questions that are being asked. I think that as we start to interpret some of the actions around us, it would be nice to frame that in the context of what technologies are being used to drive us there.
I want to include some questions from the audience here. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll send around some microphones. And okay, we do have a question. So while we do while we get the microphones up to you, I wanted to ask, and I think Jennifer did a really good job of summing this up. From all of your perspectives, so what questions should journalists be asking when they receive a data set? And Jennifer did a great first step at this, and I wanted to see if you two had any other suggestions to add there.
I look always for motivation. Why is this being supplied to me? What are the potential pressures that this individual might be under in order to give me this data? What's the ultimate agenda? And I have just I think a healthy dose of skepticism and protect yourself first.
Stephanie?
I agree. I also think
kind of identifying what that agenda is. And also, I love that you said that you love raw data. And I think as PR students, that's something that we should consider when we are pitching a story, to be able to supply that raw data so that you can actually go in and validate it in accuracy. So I think that's helpful.
Do you still teach PAM? This is something I learned when I was in journalism school. It's PAM, purpose, audience and motivation. So what was the publisher's purpose in publishing that? Who's the audience that they were publishing to, and what was their motivation? Also in critical thinking, always suspend judgment. How can you suspend judgment in this? Take in multiple perspectives, so you're able to help think critically about this information. Okay, so the question.
Yes. I was just wanting clarity about where you had said that web surveys are not considered actual data and research. You're talking about like polls or things where somebody says, take this survey for me, please, rather than things like where people actually target populations and do online research. Am I correct?
Every participant has an equal chance of being in the sample. That's considered a scientific survey. So it's hard to do that these days because of, unlisted phone numbers, and when you're doing email, you're obviously, leaving out people who are less technological, or doing a web survey, you're leaving out a population knowingly. But if you're doing what you can to assure that you're actually getting a random sample, then you're going to get data that's more representative of the group that you want to get.
What other questions out there? Oh, we have a hand up here in the front.
Hello. Is it on? Okay, awesome. I just got in, so this is probably the last session, but I didn't know DAC could be this interesting. But I do have a question, though. Way back in the 90s, it was like, I know, 90s reference. Hey, I'm a 90s kid, can't help it. I digress. I was just wondering, because back then the companies were so to themselves, and whenever we heard prod, it came out. Why do you guys, from each of your perspectives now, think that they are more interested in our data and social media?
Because they can, right?
Yeah. It's about you.
Yeah.
You drive the business. If we don't have our customers, then we don't have the business.
Yeah, and we can't evolve without engaging you. We can't continue to be relevant to you. Ultimately, every person that works at a company is a consumer, and some of the cultural shifts that we've seen as the leadership in companies has grown younger, and we have more of the younger generations coming up, is just a reshaping of these cultures based on a long evolved value system. And many of the things, the walls that we saw in companies before were parental, from a parental culture. Driven on, from the 30s through the 70s, and we finally, it's a cycle, so the pendulum swings, and right now the pendulum is for openness and transparency. I hope the pendulum stays on this side for a really long time. The danger being that as we have things like artificial intelligence, that it'll swing way back to the other side. So that's why I, invite everybody to be a part of that conversation.
I think some of this also has to do with empathy to a certain extent too. And this is something about underneath the growth of the brand marketing or content marketing or native advertising, is that people gravitate to stories. I don't know. I don't know if we talked about it today, but there was a Google commercial a while back, and this guy was Googling a plane ticket to France, how to propose to your girlfriend, and then ultimately you see him do this Google search for how to build a crib. And so there, it was just a very personal personal story that told a narrative, and it was all about, and Google wanted to do that because they wanted to be empathetic. They wanted to be able to show the personal side. And we're seeing marketing and PR really want to learn a lot from, a lot of the same elements of what makes a great story. And are you seeing that in your case studies in PR as well?
Absolutely, and I think that's the unifying theme for all of us and for the school. I think storytelling is it. And we are always putting out those stories, content marketing. Quick example, Procter & Gamble had a website, and it told stories not necessarily about their products, but how people organized their lives or how they used the Swiffer to clean their floor, the dog hair, whatever. So they incorporated their products, but they told stories and they added value. So it was the same element of that storytelling with the brand in there.
And Disney, for example, they've hired a whole group of moms to blog. And they say, we want you to blog about the good, the bad, the ugly. When there's trash at our at our theme parks, blog about it. That way we know about it. If there are, what theme parks have the best food, what rides have the longest lines, because our audience values authenticity. And that's one value that we're starting to see more prevalently as content marketing is gaining a lot of momentum.
See that a lot in the tone of advertising as well, that it doesn't need to be so polished, it doesn't need to be so Hollywood perfect. It's about real people. In many cases, it's about the advocates themselves representing the brand.
But from an ethical perspective, where do we draw the line? How do we know how clearly does Disney need to make it that we're paying these folks?
I think the FTC has stepped in with regard to that and disclosure. And it doesn't suffice anymore to put that disclosure at the bottom of a blog post, but now it has to be clear and marked at the top of a blog post. So that is even in a tweet. So you have to mark that it's an ad. So I think that they're kind of their watchdog. They're watching us to make sure that we are fully disclosing relationships.
So we're seeing spokespeople tweeting on behalf of an organization. You'll see in an airline sponsorship of Serena Williams or Venus Williams, they'll say that you have to send out so many tweets during the year. And then how does Venus or Serena need to clearly mark that tweet when they send it out? So when they say, oh my gosh, I'm just relaxing so nicely on my Delta Airlines flight, we need to be, as consumers, we need to be aware of that is part of some sort of sponsorship agreement.
And the whole native advertising is another ethical conversation, probably not for today because you have to catch a plane.
I need to catch a Delta Airlines flight. They are not paying me to say that. What other questions do we have for this group? We have one in the back here. Sure.
With all the behavior data that is available, how has the need and value from surveys, interviews, focus groups, how has that changed over time? Because now a lot of the questions that you used to ask there, you can pretty much find through behavior. At least that's my understanding.
I think we still need to do those surveys because there's no true way to measure awareness without asking someone. Because again, on social media, even though we may be able to kind of infer some relationships and that people are aware of our products because they're retweeting it and sharing it, we don't truly know how effective our campaign was unless we measure those benchmarks before. How aware were they before and how aware were they after? So I think that still is a part of this process.
I absolutely agree. As I was talking about this morning, the farther that your data gets away from its original context, the less reliable it really is. So as a company, I'm collecting data about what you buy and what you like about it and what you don't like about it and what would you like me to do about to make the website better, or what things about what they want from what you want from my company. And when you start to take it out of that context, you really confuse the conversation. And so really the best way to get to what you can do for your customers is to talk to your customers and talk to them in a context that makes sense to them. instead of trying to understand where their kid goes to school or what car they drive or where, how they vote. You know, getting to know them and what they need should be job number one.
Well, I want to thank our panelists here in this conversation. I think you guys all come from different perspectives, but we're able to tie this topic into a really relevant conversation that was really cohesive. And I could listen to examples from you all day, Jennifer, on sanitizing data and finding inconsistencies in data. And I think that really gave us a lot of great insight and takeaways that we can go forward, which dovetails nicely into our final session here that I will pass over to Jan because she's going to be able to help us highlight some of the highlights from today. Highlight the highlights. It's like Sports Center for Media Ethics.
Center for Media Ethics. I love it. Thank you. So I don't know about all